Lily never expected that stopping to help a stranger on a stormy night would change her life forever. She had no idea that the injured man she pulled from a wrecked car was one of the most powerful businessmen in the country. And she certainly didn't expect him to walk into her small cafe days later, not just to thank her, but to offer her something she never could have imagined. A job. A chance to step into his world. It was supposed to be temporary. A simple opportunity. But as she got closer to Nicholas Blake, she realized that beneath his ruthless exterior was a man carrying far more than just his wealth and reputation. And the more time they spent together, the more she began to wonder, was she the one saving him, or was he saving her? The rain was relentless, pounding against Lily Harper's windshield as she navigated the nearly deserted road. The storm had rolled in faster than expected, turning what should have been a quiet drive home into a battle against the elements. The wind howled through the trees lining the highway, and every few seconds, lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the empty road ahead. She tightened her grip on the steering wheel, trying to focus despite the heavy sheets of rain obscuring her vision. The cafe where she worked had closed late, and now she just wanted to get home, wrap herself in a warm blanket, and forget about the miserable weather outside. As she turned onto a narrow, winding bypass road, her headlights caught something unusual, a pair of red flashing lights cutting through the darkness. Her heart skipped a beat as she realized it was the hazard lights of a car that had veered off the road. The vehicle was badly damaged, the front end crumpled from what looked like a direct impact with a tree. The windshield was cracked, the passenger side door hung open, and the engine was still faintly humming. Lily's instincts screamed at her to stop. Slowing down, she pulled onto the side of the road, her own tires splashing through a growing puddle. As she unbuckled her seatbelt and reached for the door handle, she hesitated for just a second. What if it was a trap? She had heard too many stories of carjackings and staged accidents. But then she saw him, a man, struggling to get out of the wreckage, gripping the frame of the car for support. Even through the rain and darkness, she could see that he was injured. Blood ran down the side of his face, and he swayed unsteadily, clearly disoriented. Her hesitation vanished. Lily sprinted toward him, her shoes immediately soaking through as she ran through the mud and rain. As she got closer, she could see that he was tall, well-dressed, though his expensive shirt was now soaked and clinging to his frame. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead, and when he turned to look at her, his piercing blue eyes were filled with pain and confusion. "Hey, can you hear me?" she shouted over the wind. The man blinked, trying to focus on her. "My car, phone, no signal," he muttered, his voice hoarse. Lily quickly scanned the area. He was right, out here, on this isolated road, there was little chance of getting a signal, and in this storm, waiting for someone to drive by was not an option. She had seen the news reports earlier in the evening, emergency services were overwhelmed with accidents caused by the storm. If they stayed here, he might not last long enough for help to arrive. "You need a hospital," she said firmly, stepping closer. He swayed again, and before he could collapse, she reached out, wrapping an arm around his waist and pulling his arm over her shoulders. He was taller and heavier than she expected, and it took all her strength to keep him steady. "There's no service here, and no one's coming anytime soon," she continued. "The town isn't far, we'll walk." For a second, she thought he might argue, but instead, he simply nodded, gritting his teeth as he shifted his weight against her. She could tell he was in pain, but he wasn't complaining, which only made her more determined to get him to safety. They started moving, step by slow step, through the rain and wind. The road was slick, and she had to focus on keeping both of them upright. She could feel the tension in his body with every movement, his breaths uneven as he fought to stay conscious. The rain continued to pour, soaking them both to the bone, but Lily refused to let that slow her down. "Just hold on," she said, adjusting her grip on him. "We'll get there." The man exhaled sharply, his voice barely above a whisper. "What's your name?" "Lily," she answered, keeping her eyes on the road ahead. Lily Harper. He was quiet for a moment before murmuring, Nicholas. Lily tightened her hold on him, forcing herself to move faster despite the ache in her muscles. She didn't know who he was, didn't know why he was out here alone, but none of that mattered right now. The only thing that mattered was getting him to safety before it was too late. The rain didn't let up as Lily and Nicholas trudged forward, each step feeling heavier than the last. The wind howled through the trees, bending their branches under its force, and lightning flashed every few moments, briefly illuminating the deserted road ahead. The storm made everything more difficult, each gust of wind nearly knocked them off balance, and the water rushing down the pavement made it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Nicholas leaned heavily against her, his breathing uneven, his weight growing heavier as exhaustion set in. Lily tightened her grip around his waist, determined not to let him fall. She wasn't sure how badly he was hurt, but judging by the way he winced every time he stepped down on his right leg, she suspected he had more than just a head injury. He was limping now, his steps growing slower, and she could feel his body trembling from the cold. She knew they had to keep moving. Stopping wasn't an option. Stay with me, Nicholas, she urged, adjusting her hold on him to take more of his weight. We're not far now. Just a little longer. Nicholas let out a rough breath, his voice barely audible over the storm. I owe you, for this. You don't owe me anything, she said firmly. Just focus on walking. For several more minutes, they pushed forward, the storm raging around them. Lily's heart pounded as she scanned the road for any sign of help, but all she could see was darkness, the rain swallowing any distant lights. Just when she started to worry they might not make it in time, she spotted something ahead, headlights cutting through the downpour. A vehicle was approaching, its beams bouncing off the wet pavement as it came toward them. Relief flooded her as she stepped forward, waving her free arm frantically. Hey! Over here! The truck slowed, its tires splashing through the water as it came to a stop beside them. A middle-aged man in a rain-soaked baseball cap leaned out of the window, eyes widening as he took in their drenched and battered appearance. What the hell happened? He asked, concern evident in his voice. Car accident, Lily explained quickly. He's hurt. We need to get to the hospital, fast. The driver didn't hesitate. Get in. Lily helped Nicholas into the truck, climbing in beside him and shutting the door as the driver immediately pulled back onto the road. The warmth inside the vehicle was an instant relief, but she barely noticed, too focused on Nicholas. He leaned his head against the seat, eyes closed, his breathing still labored. Stay awake, she said, nudging his arm. We're almost there. Nicholas forced his eyes open, giving her a tired smirk. You're bossy. Lily huffed, shaking her head. And you're in no position to complain. The driver glanced at them through the rearview mirror. You're lucky she found you, buddy. In this weather, most folks wouldn't have stopped. Nicholas's gaze flickered to Lily, something unreadable in his expression. Yeah, he murmured. Lucky. 15 minutes later, they reached the hospital. As soon as they pulled up to the emergency entrance, the doors burst open and medical staff rushed toward them. 2 nurses and a doctor helped Nicholas out of the truck, placing him onto a stretcher as they checked his vitals. Lily stepped back, suddenly feeling out of place as the professionals took over. Miss, are you all right? One of the nurses asked, noticing her soaked clothes and exhausted expression. I'm fine, Lily said quickly, watching as they wheeled Nicholas inside. He turned his head slightly, eyes searching for her, and for some reason, she felt compelled to follow. The hospital was bright and sterile, a stark contrast to the dark storm outside. Nicholas was taken through the double doors while she remained in the waiting area, unsure what to do next. She had done her part, he was safe now, in the hands of doctors who knew how to help him. She had no reason to stay. But for some reason, she couldn't bring herself to leave. Lily sat in the waiting area, her wet clothes clinging uncomfortably to her skin, the cold from the air conditioning making her shiver. The adrenaline that had carried her through the storm was fading, leaving exhaustion in its place. She rubbed her arms, staring at the double doors Nicholas had disappeared through, telling herself that she should leave. She had done her part. He was safe now. There was nothing more she could do for him. But something kept her glued to her seat. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the strange connection she had felt while helping him walk through the storm, his weight pressed against her as they fought against the wind and rain. Or maybe it was the way he had looked at her just before they took him inside, as if he wasn't ready for her to disappear just yet. A nurse passed by, offering her a cup of coffee, which she accepted with a grateful nod. The warmth seeped through her fingers, but it did little to ease the tension coiling in her stomach. She didn't even know why she was so anxious. She barely knew Nicholas. He was just a stranger she had helped on the side of the road, and yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that this night wasn't over for them. Half an hour later, the waiting room doors swung open, and a tall man in an expensive suit walked in, his presence immediately commanding attention. He was in his mid-40s, sharp-eyed, with an air of authority that suggested he was used to getting what he wanted. He scanned the room quickly before his gaze landed on her. "You're the one who brought Mr. Blake here?" His voice was calm, but there was something in his tone that made it clear he wasn't used to asking questions, only giving orders. Lily frowned slightly, caught off guard by how direct he was. "Yes, who are you?" "I'm his assistant, Daniel Grayson," the man replied. "I was contacted as soon as he was admitted." Lily processed that for a moment. Of course, a man like Nicholas Blake would have people working for him, handling his affairs. She suddenly felt out of place, as if she had accidentally stepped into a world she didn't belong to. "Is he going to be okay?" she asked, not sure why she felt the need to. Daniel's expression remained unreadable. "The doctor said he suffered a mild concussion and a few bruised ribs, but he'll recover." He studied her for a moment before adding, "Mr. Blake doesn't usually let people get close to him. It's unusual that he allowed you to help him." Lily wasn't sure how to respond to that. It wasn't like he had much of a choice, she finally said. He was injured and stranded in the middle of a storm. "I just did what anyone else would have done." Daniel gave her a knowing look, as if he didn't quite believe that. "Perhaps," he said. "But either way, I appreciate your help." Lily shifted uncomfortably, feeling like this conversation was a polite way of telling her that she had done her part and could go now. Maybe that was for the best. She had no reason to linger in the world of wealthy businessmen and their assistants. She set her coffee cup down and stood up. "Well, I'm glad he's going to be all right," she said. "I should probably get going." She turned to leave, but before she could take a step, another voice called out her name. "Lily." She froze and turned back toward the double doors. Nicholas stood there, still looking pale and a little unsteady, but very much awake. He was wearing a hospital gown now, his injured arm wrapped in a sling, but his blue eyes were locked onto hers. "You stayed?" he asked, his voice softer than before, almost surprised. Lily hesitated for a moment before nodding. "I wasn't sure if you were okay." Something in his expression shifted, as if her words meant more to him than she realized. He glanced at Daniel, who took the hint and stepped back, giving them privacy. "You didn't have to," Nicholas said, his gaze never leaving hers. Lily crossed her arms, suddenly feeling exposed under his intense stare. "I know. But I wanted to." Nicholas exhaled, shaking his head slightly. "I don't know how to thank you for what you did tonight." "You don't have to," she said simply. "Just get better." He studied her for a long moment before a small smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. "You're really not going to let me do anything for you, are you?" Lily arched a brow. "I didn't help you for a reward, if that's what you're thinking." Nicholas chuckled, though the movement seemed to cause him pain because he winced slightly. "I figured. But that doesn't mean I'm going to forget what you did." Lily wasn't sure what to say to that, so she just nodded. I should go now. Get some rest, Nicholas. As she turned to leave, she felt his gaze follow her. And for some reason, she knew, this wasn't the last time she would see him. Lily spent the next few days trying to push the entire experience out of her mind. She told herself that she had done what any decent person would have done, helped a man in need, made sure he was safe, and then walked away. There was no reason for her to dwell on it. Nicholas Blake belonged to a world completely different from hers, one filled with power, influence, and wealth beyond anything she could imagine. She was just an ordinary woman working at a small cafe, struggling to make ends meet. Their paths had crossed under extraordinary circumstances, but that didn't mean anything more would come of it. But despite her best efforts, she couldn't stop thinking about him. She found herself wondering if he had fully recovered, if he was back to his normal life, if he even remembered her at all. She scolded herself for being ridiculous. Of course, he remembered. He had literally told her that he wouldn't forget what she did for him. But that didn't mean she should be waiting for some kind of follow-up. By the time Friday rolled around, Lily had convinced herself that it was all in the past. She focused on her shift, keeping herself busy as the cafe filled with customers. It was one of their busiest days, and she barely had a moment to breathe between taking orders, making drinks, and cleaning up tables. She was just finishing up an order when the bell above the door chimed, signaling a new customer. She turned to greet them, but the words caught in her throat when she saw who it was. Nicholas Blake stood just inside the cafe, looking completely out of place among the usual patrons. He was dressed impeccably, as expected, in a tailored dark suit, his presence commanding without effort. His injuries had mostly healed, though she could still see a faint bruise near his temple and the careful way he carried himself, as if he was still recovering from the accident. But what caught her attention the most was the way he was looking at her, like he had been searching for her and had finally found what he was looking for. Lily quickly turned away, pretending to focus on the coffee machine. She wasn't sure why she suddenly felt nervous, but something about him being here, in her space, made her heart race in a way she didn't understand. She heard him approach the counter, and after a moment of silence, he spoke. "I'll take a coffee. Black." She glanced up at him, raising an eyebrow. "You don't seem like a black coffee kind of guy." A small smirk tugged at his lips. "You're right. I actually hate black coffee. But I had to get your attention somehow." Lily sighed, shaking her head as she reached for a cup. "You could have just said hello." "Where's the fun in that?" he countered, watching her as she prepared his order. "I wasn't sure if you'd even want to see me again." She glanced at him. "Why wouldn't I?" Nicholas tilted his head slightly, studying her. "Most people would have taken off the moment they realized who I was. You didn't even blink when you found out." Lily shrugged. "Why should it matter? You're just a guy who needed help." His smirk widened slightly, as if he was amused by her complete lack of intimidation. "That's exactly why I had to come find you." She handed him the coffee, wiping her hands on a towel. "So, what, you tracked me down just to buy a drink you don't even like?" Nicholas took the cup but didn't drink from it. Instead, he leaned against the counter slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. "I came because I wanted to see you again." Lily felt a flicker of something unfamiliar in her chest, something dangerously close to excitement. She quickly pushed it down, refusing to let herself entertain whatever this was. "Well, you've seen me," she said, crossing her arms. "Now what?" Nicholas's expression turned more serious. "Now, I thank you properly. You saved my life, Lily. And I don't believe in letting debts go unpaid." She narrowed her eyes. "I don't want anything from you." "I know," he said simply. "That's why I'm offering." She frowned slightly, confused. "Offering what?" "A job," he said, setting the untouched coffee cup on the counter. I want you to come work for me. Lily stared at him, stunned. Out of all the things he could have said, that was the last thing she expected. You want me to work for you? Nicholas nodded. You're smart, quick on your feet, and you don't take crap from anyone. I need someone like that in my company. She let out a short laugh, shaking her head. I work in a cafe. What makes you think I'd be useful in your world? You're more capable than you give yourself credit for, he said without hesitation. I don't offer opportunities like this often, but when I see potential, I don't ignore it. Lily crossed her arms, still trying to process everything. And what if I say no? Nicholas shrugged. Then I'll come back tomorrow and ask again. And the next day. And the next. She let out an exasperated sigh, but she couldn't help the small smile that tugged at her lips. You really don't take no for an answer, do you? Not when I see something worth pursuing, he admitted, his gaze steady. Lily didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to turn him down on principle alone, she didn't like the idea of being someone's charity case. But another part of her, the part that had always wanted more from life but never thought it was possible, couldn't ignore the opportunity he was offering. I'll think about it, she finally said. Nicholas smiled. That's all I ask. As he turned to leave, she watched him go, feeling like the ground beneath her had suddenly shifted. She had walked into work this morning thinking her life was normal, predictable. But now, Nicholas Blake had walked into her cafe, offering her a choice that could change everything. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't sure which path she was supposed to take. Lily spent the rest of the day replaying her conversation with Nicholas in her mind, unable to focus on anything else. A job. At his company. The idea was so absurd that she almost laughed every time she thought about it. She was a waitress, someone who spent her days taking orders and wiping down tables. Nicholas Blake was a man who owned skyscrapers, whose name was probably printed in glossy business magazines, and who had more money than she could even comprehend. And yet, he had walked into her cafe, looked her in the eye, and told her that he wanted her to work for him. She didn't understand it. It made no sense. People like him didn't give people like her opportunities like this. She wasn't special. She had no experience in the corporate world. The closest she had ever been to a high-powered business meeting was when businessmen came into the cafe, talking loudly on their phones while ordering overpriced lattes. By the time her shift ended, her mind was still spinning. She stepped out of the cafe and pulled her jacket tighter around herself as a crisp evening breeze swept through the streets. The sky was dark, the city glowing with neon lights and the constant buzz of traffic. As she started walking home, she heard footsteps approaching from behind. Instinctively, she tensed, but when she turned around, she found Nicholas standing there, his hands casually in his coat pockets. You know, most people call before showing up like this, she said, arching an eyebrow. Nicholas smirked. Most people don't ignore my offer all day. Lily sighed, shaking her head. I wasn't ignoring it. I was thinking. And, he asked, tilting his head slightly. And I still don't get why you're doing this, she admitted. You don't even know me. Nicholas took a step closer, his gaze steady. I know enough. I know you didn't hesitate to help a complete stranger in the middle of a storm. I know you're stubborn and don't take anything at face value. And I know that you want something more than spending the rest of your life in that cafe. Lily swallowed, caught off guard by how easily he had read her. She had spent so much time pretending that she was fine with the way things were, convincing herself that she was content with her small, simple life. But deep down, she had always wanted more. She had just never believed that more was meant for people like her. You could be offering this job to anyone, she pointed out. Someone actually qualified. Nicholas let out a short laugh. You think qualifications are the only thing that matters? Half the people in my company have degrees from Ivy League schools, and most of them wouldn't have lasted 5 minutes in that storm with me. Intelligence isn't just about what's on paper, Lily. It's about how you handle real life. And from what I've seen, you handle it better than most. She wanted to argue, to find a reason why this was a mistake, but the way he was looking at her made it difficult to deny that he truly believed what he was saying. No one had ever looked at her like that before, not like she was just another person passing through life, but like she actually mattered. So what would this job even be? She asked, crossing her arms. Am I supposed to fetch coffee for your executives? Nicholas smirked. You'd be my assistant. Lily's eyebrows shot up. Your assistant? Don't look so horrified, he said, amused. It's not as bad as it sounds. She let out a short, incredulous laugh. Right. So I just follow you around, schedule your meetings, and, what? Make sure your suits don't get wrinkled. You do a lot more than that, Nicholas said, his expression turning more serious. You'd learn how my company works, be involved in decisions, and have access to opportunities most people would kill for. This isn't just some desk job. It's a chance to step into a different world. Lily exhaled, rubbing her forehead. And why would you want me for that? Because you don't treat me like I'm someone untouchable, he said simply. You talk to me like I'm just another guy. And that's exactly what I need. She stared at him, trying to find the catch, the ulterior motive. But there was nothing in his face that suggested he was playing a game. He was completely serious. I don't know anything about business, she admitted. You'll learn, he said. What if I screw up? You will, he said with a small smile. But you'll figure it out. Lily bit her lip, her heart pounding. She had spent years convincing herself that this kind of life wasn't for her, that she wasn't the type of person who got chances like this. But here was Nicholas Blake, standing in front of her, telling her that he saw something in her that she couldn't even see in herself. 1 month, she said finally. I'll try it for 1 month. No promises after that. Nicholas's smirk returned. 1 month is all I need. As he turned and walked away, Lily watched him go, feeling like she had just agreed to something that would change her life forever. And for the first time, she wasn't sure if that terrified her or excited her more. The next morning, Lily stood in front of the towering glass building that bore Nicholas Blake's name, feeling like she had made a mistake. The entire place looked too sleek, too polished, too expensive for someone like her. People in tailored suits passed by, barely sparing her a glance, each of them looking like they belonged in a world where power was currency and ambition was the only language spoken. She swallowed hard, gripping the strap of her bag, reminding herself that this was only temporary. 1 month. That's what she had agreed to. If she hated it, she could walk away. Taking a deep breath, she pushed through the revolving doors and stepped inside. The lobby was massive, with high ceilings and marble floors that gleamed under the soft glow of recessed lighting. A sleek reception desk stood in the center, staffed by a perfectly dressed woman who barely looked up as Lily approached. Can I help you? The receptionist asked, her tone neutral but clipped. I'm here for Nicholas Blake, Lily said, feeling ridiculous even saying his name. The woman's gaze flicked over her, scanning her like she was trying to determine if she was lost. Before she could respond, a voice called from across the room. She's with me. Lily turned to see Daniel Grayson, Nicholas's assistant, striding toward her with his usual sharp, businesslike expression. Unlike the last time they met at the hospital, this time he looked entirely in his element, his navy suit crisp, his steps purposeful. Follow me, he said, not waiting for her response. Lily hurried after him, barely keeping up as he led her to a private elevator. The doors closed behind them, and the moment they began their ascent, Daniel finally turned to her. Mr. Blake is in a meeting, but he'll see you once he's done, he said, his tone formal, as if he were speaking to an employee he had no personal connection to. Lily raised an eyebrow. You don't approve of this, do you? Daniel's expression remained unreadable. It's not my place to approve or disapprove. My job is to ensure that Mr. Blake's decisions are carried out efficiently. That's a very professional way of saying you think this is a bad idea, she noted. Daniel finally looked at her, his gaze assessing. Mr. Blake has never brought someone into his inner circle without a clear purpose. You are an anomaly. Lily wasn't sure if that was a compliment or an insult, but she didn't have time to dwell on it. The elevator chimed, and the doors slid open, revealing a sleek, modern office space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Daniel led her through the hallways, past people who barely looked up from their computers as they worked. Finally, he stopped outside a glass office. Wait here, he instructed before disappearing through the doors. Lily exhaled slowly, her nerves creeping in again. She wasn't sure why she felt so out of place here. It wasn't just that she didn't belong, it was the feeling that she was stepping into something much bigger than she understood. The door opened a few minutes later, and Nicholas stepped out. He looked as sharp as ever, his dark suit perfectly fitted, his expression composed. But when his eyes landed on her, something in them softened just slightly. You showed up, he said, sounding almost impressed. Lily crossed her arms. I said I would. A hint of amusement flickered across his face. Come on. Let's get started. He led her inside his office, which was even more intimidating than the rest of the building. The massive windows provided a breathtaking view of the skyline, and the dark wood desk in the center of the room looked more like a command station than a workspace. Lily hesitated near the doorway. So what exactly am I supposed to be doing? Nicholas gestured to a chair across from his desk. Sit. She sat reluctantly, feeling like she was being summoned for a performance review before she even had a job. Your role here is simple, Nicholas said, leaning back in his chair. You'll shadow me, assist in day-to-day operations, and handle anything I don't have time for. That's not simple, Lily pointed out. He smirked. You'll figure it out. Lily exhaled, already regretting this decision. And if I completely fail at this? Nicholas studied her for a moment before replying. Then I'll find something else for you to do. She narrowed her eyes. You really don't let people fail, do you? No, he said simply. I don't. Lily wasn't sure if that was reassuring or terrifying. But as Nicholas slid a stack of documents toward her, she realized one thing, this wasn't going to be anything like the life she had known before. And whether she was ready for it or not, she was already in too deep to turn back now. The first week at Nicholas Blake's company was a whirlwind. Lily had never experienced anything like it before, fast-paced meetings, back-to-back schedules, and an endless stream of phone calls that made her head spin. Nicholas expected efficiency, precision, and an ability to adapt without hesitation. He wasn't unkind, but he didn't have the patience for hand-holding, which meant Lily had to learn quickly if she wanted to keep up. On her second day, she nearly got lost trying to navigate the maze of offices. The entire top floor of the Blake Corporation building was designed with sleek glass walls, dark wood paneling, and minimalist furniture that screamed power and control. Every person she passed seemed to walk with a purpose, and Lily felt like an outsider in a world where everyone already knew their place. By the end of the week, however, she had started to find her rhythm. She learned how Nicholas liked his schedules arranged, how he preferred to receive updates in person rather than over email, and how he had a habit of pacing when he was deep in thought. She noticed the way people spoke to him, some with respect, others with fear, but none with the kind of ease she did. He was their boss, their leader, the untouchable CEO. But to Lily, he was still just Nicholas, the man she had pulled from a wrecked car in the middle of a storm. Late one evening, after most of the staff had gone home, she found herself sitting at her desk outside his office, going over a list of tasks he had given her. The building was quieter now, the hum of the city beyond the windows the only sound filling the space. She was so focused on her work that she didn't hear Nicholas step out of his office until he was standing beside her desk. "You're still here," he noted, his voice carrying a trace of surprise. Lily looked up, rubbing her eyes. "So are you." Nicholas smirked, crossing his arms. "I own the place. What's your excuse?" She exhaled, leaning back in her chair. "Trying to prove I can actually do this job." Nicholas studied her for a moment before leaning against the desk. "And? What's your verdict?" Lily glanced at the papers in front of her. "I think I'm getting the hang of it. But I also think I've never been this exhausted in my life." A chuckle escaped him, something rare enough that it caught her attention. "Welcome to my world." Lily tilted her head slightly, observing him. "Is this what your life is like all the time? Just, work, work, and more work?" Nicholas shrugged. "It's what I built. What I'm good at." "But do you actually enjoy it?" she asked, genuinely curious. For a moment, he didn't answer. Instead, he looked past her, toward the windows that overlooked the city. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. "I used to. Or maybe I convinced myself that I did." Lily frowned. "What changed?" Nicholas met her gaze. "I don't know. Maybe I started realizing that success isn't the same thing as having a life." Lily held his gaze, feeling like he had just let her see a part of himself that few people ever did. It was strange, the way their conversations always seemed to toe the line between professional and personal, as if there was an unspoken understanding between them that neither wanted to acknowledge outright. She cleared her throat, breaking the moment. "Well, for what it's worth, I think you should take a break every once in a while. You know, act like a normal person." Nicholas raised an amused eyebrow. "And what exactly do normal people do?" Lily thought for a second before smirking. "Eat pizza. Watch bad movies. Sleep before 3 a.m. Nicholas chuckled. "That sounds dangerously close to relaxing." "Terrifying, isn't it?" she teased. He shook his head, a small smile playing at his lips. "All right, Lily Harper. If I take a break one of these days, I'll let you pick the movie." Lily grinned, feeling an unexpected warmth settle in her chest. "Deal." Nicholas pushed away from the desk, glancing at the time. "You should head home. You've done enough for today." Lily stretched, realizing how stiff her body had become from sitting for so long. "Yeah, I probably should." As she gathered her things, Nicholas watched her, something unreadable in his expression. "You're doing well here, you know," he said after a moment. Lily paused, caught off guard by the compliment. "Thanks. That actually means a lot." Nicholas gave her a nod before heading back into his office. As Lily left the building that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that something between them had shifted, something subtle but undeniable. And for the first time since she had started this job, she wasn't just wondering if she belonged here. She was starting to realize that maybe she did. Lily had expected her new job to be overwhelming, but she hadn't expected how much she would actually grow to enjoy it. The long hours, the endless meetings, and the constant pressure to stay on top of everything had become a challenge she was determined to master. She still had moments where she felt like an outsider in Nicholas's world, but she was learning. And more than that, she was starting to feel like she belonged. She had also come to understand Nicholas in a way she never expected. He was a man who had built his empire with ruthless determination, who demanded excellence from everyone around him, but underneath that hardened exterior, there was something else. A man who, despite his wealth and success, often seemed like he was standing alone at the top, surrounded by everything yet truly connected to nothing. One evening, as the city lights flickered through the windows of his office, Lily found herself sitting across from him after another long day. They had just finished reviewing a new proposal, but neither of them seemed eager to leave. "You were right, you know," Nicholas said suddenly, his voice breaking the comfortable silence. Lily looked up from her notes, raising an eyebrow. About what? Nicholas leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping lightly against the desk. About taking a break. About the fact that I don't really live outside of this. He gestured around the office, his expression unreadable. I've spent so many years convincing myself that work is everything, that it's the only thing that matters. But lately, I'm not so sure. Lily studied him for a moment before speaking. It's not too late to change that. A faint smirk tugged at his lips. You make it sound so easy. It's not, she admitted. But you have to start somewhere. Nicholas exhaled, as if considering her words. And where would you suggest I start? Lily hesitated, then leaned forward slightly. Let's start simple. One night. No work. Just something normal. You promised, remember? Nicholas looked at her, something flickering in his gaze. You actually want to cash in on that? Lily smirked. I do. And lucky for you, I've already picked the worst movie I could find. Nicholas chuckled, shaking his head. Fine. But if it's terrible, I reserve the right to mock it the entire time. That's part of the fun, she said, grinning. That night, for the first time in years, Nicholas Blake did something completely out of character. He stepped away from his empire, if only for a little while. They ended up at Lily's small apartment, a stark contrast to his world of luxury, but he didn't seem to mind. They sat on her worn-out couch, eating cheap pizza while watching a film so ridiculous that even Nicholas couldn't help but laugh at how bad it was. Lily stole a glance at him, watching as he leaned back, his usual guarded expression replaced with something lighter, something more real. It was a version of him she had never seen before. You know, he said, turning to look at her, I can't remember the last time I did something like this. Lily smiled, taking a sip of her drink. Then we'll have to make sure it's not the last. Nicholas held her gaze for a moment, something unspoken passing between them. For the first time since she met him, he didn't look like the unreachable CEO or the man burdened by expectations. He just looked like someone who, for the first time in a long while, wasn't alone. And as Lily sat there, laughing at the absurdity of the movie and enjoying the rare sight of Nicholas Blake looking truly at ease, she realized something else. This wasn't just a job anymore. This was the start of something she hadn't been looking for but somehow found anyway. And for once, she wasn't afraid to see where it would lead. This story is about more than just an unexpected opportunity or a chance encounter. It's about transformation, trust, and the courage to step into the unknown. Lily starts as an ordinary woman, someone who never imagined herself in the world of power and wealth, yet through her kindness and resilience, she finds herself not just surviving in it, but thriving. What makes her journey so compelling is that she never loses herself in the process. She doesn't change to fit into Nicholas's world. Instead, she brings a piece of her own world into his, reminding him that success without true connection is empty. Nicholas, on the other hand, undergoes an even deeper transformation. He begins the story as a man who has built his life around work, control, and avoiding vulnerability. He believes that power and wealth are the only things that matter, until Lily comes along and forces him to question everything. She sees him not as a billionaire, not as an untouchable CEO, but as a person. And in doing so, she gives him something no amount of money can buy, a reason to slow down, to feel, and to truly live. The beauty of this ending is that it doesn't wrap everything up in a perfect bow. Lily and Nicholas are still figuring things out, still navigating their feelings and what their relationship means outside of the professional walls of his company. But what makes it satisfying is the promise of something real, something meaningful. It's not just about romance or success, it's about two people who, against all odds, found what they didn't even know they were looking for in each other. Ultimately, this is a story about how one moment, one decision, can change everything. And sometimes, the most unexpected detours lead us exactly where we're meant to be. Logan Hastings had spent years building an empire, mastering the art of control, and ensuring that nothing in his life happened by chance. But as he sat alone in an upscale restaurant on Valentine's Day, sipping whiskey and ignoring the sea of couples around him, fate decided to shatter his perfect world. Across the room, he spotted her, Sophie, the woman he had once loved and lost. But it wasn't just Sophie who caught his attention. Sitting beside her was a little boy, no older than 3, with familiar dark eyes and a face that sent a shockwave through Logan's entire being. His heart pounded as the realization hit him like a punch to the chest. He had a son. And he had never known. Logan Hastings never cared much for Valentine's Day. It was just another evening, another night where couples filled expensive restaurants, exchanging flowers and whispered promises. But for him, it was nothing more than an opportunity to enjoy a quiet dinner in one of the finest establishments in the city. He wasn't lonely. At least, that's what he told himself. He had built a life where emotions were secondary, where success was measured by numbers and influence, not by love or companionship. The restaurant was elegant, dimly lit with soft golden hues that reflected off the polished mahogany tables. Around him, laughter and murmured conversations blended with the soft instrumental music playing in the background. Every table was filled with couples leaning toward each other, lost in their own worlds. Logan sat alone at his usual spot, a corner table near the window overlooking the city skyline. He sipped his whiskey slowly, letting the warmth of the liquor settle in his chest as he glanced at the menu. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw her. Sophie. The sight of her hit him like a shock to the system. It had been 3 years since he had last seen her, 3 years since they had parted ways, since she had walked away from him without looking back. Yet here she was, standing at the entrance of the restaurant, talking to the host, looking just as stunning as he remembered. Her chestnut hair fell in loose waves over her shoulders, and she carried herself with the same quiet confidence that had always drawn him to her. But it wasn't just her presence that made his breath catch. It was the little boy standing beside her. The child couldn't have been more than 3 years old. He had soft brown curls and big, curious eyes that darted around the restaurant. Logan felt a strange, unsettling sensation settle in his gut. The boy's face was unfamiliar, yet something about him felt undeniably familiar. His posture, the way he tilted his head slightly as he observed the room, it was too close to something Logan had seen before. His own reflection. Sophie led the child to a table across the room, unaware of Logan's presence. She helped him into his seat, adjusting the collar of his tiny button-down shirt before turning to the waiter. Her movements were gentle, practiced, the way a mother instinctively cared for her child. Logan couldn't look away. His mind raced, trying to grasp what he was seeing. Was it possible? Could this boy be his? The idea was absurd. If Sophie had been pregnant when they parted ways, wouldn't she have told him? Wouldn't he have known? He was a man who controlled every aspect of his life, who left no room for surprises. And yet, as he sat there, watching them from across the restaurant, a cold realization crept up his spine. He had to find out the truth. Without thinking, he set his glass down and stood. His heart pounded in his chest as he walked toward her table. His presence hadn't gone unnoticed. Sophie looked up just as he approached, and the moment their eyes met, he saw it. A flicker of recognition. A shadow of hesitation. And beneath it all, something else. Guilt. Logan stopped at the edge of the table, his gaze shifting from her to the boy, who was happily eating small bites of pasta, oblivious to the tension in the air. He turned back to Sophie, his voice steady but firm. "Is he mine?" Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. For the first time in his life, Logan felt the ground beneath him shift, his carefully constructed world tilting on an axis he hadn't even realized existed. Sophie swallowed hard, glancing at the child before meeting his gaze again. And in that moment, he knew. She didn't have to say it. He already had his answer. Sophie looked like she wanted to say something, but no words came out. Logan could see it in her eyes, the hesitation, the conflict, the way her fingers tightened slightly around the napkin in her lap. He had spent years reading people, understanding negotiations, sensing when someone was holding back the truth. And right now, Sophie was holding back everything. The little boy sitting next to her remained blissfully unaware of the tension that had just settled over the table. He hummed quietly to himself as he picked at his pasta, swinging his tiny legs under the chair. He was at ease, comfortable, as if this was just another ordinary night. But to Logan, nothing about this moment felt ordinary. "Sophie," he said, his voice quieter now, though no less intense. "I asked you a question." She finally exhaled, glancing at the boy before turning her attention back to Logan. "Not here," she murmured. Logan's jaw clenched. It wasn't a denial. It wasn't an outright admission either, but the way she said it, carefully, deliberately, told him everything he needed to know. He nodded stiffly. "Fine. Then let's talk somewhere else." Sophie hesitated, her gaze flickering back to the boy. Logan could tell she was calculating, weighing her options. Finally, she nodded. "Give me a minute." She turned to the child, her expression softening instantly. "Caleb, sweetheart, can you stay here with Miss Emily for a few minutes?" she asked, motioning toward one of the waitresses, who had just passed by and clearly recognized them. The boy, Caleb, looked up and nodded, completely trusting his mother's decision. Logan felt a strange pang in his chest as he watched their interaction. It was clear that Caleb adored her, that he felt safe with her, that he had no idea the weight of what was happening right now. Sophie stood, brushing a hand lightly over Caleb's curls before leading Logan toward a quieter section of the restaurant, near the entrance. The air between them felt thick, heavy with words left unsaid. Logan crossed his arms, his patience wearing thin. "Tell me the truth," he said. Sophie took a shaky breath. "Logan. Is he mine?" he pressed, his voice firm but not raised. She looked away for a moment, as if gathering the courage to say it aloud. When she finally met his gaze again, her brown eyes were filled with something that looked like regret, maybe even sadness. "Yes," she admitted softly. "He's yours." The words hit him like a force he hadn't been prepared for, even though he had already suspected the answer. His entire body tensed, his mind struggling to process the reality of what she had just confirmed. 3 years. He had a son for 3 years and never knew. His hands curled into fists at his sides, not out of anger toward the child, never toward him, but toward the situation, toward the choices that had been made without him. "You kept him from me," he said, his voice quieter now but no less intense. Sophie flinched slightly, but she didn't back down. "I did what I thought was best," she said. Logan let out a sharp breath. "Best for who?" "Certainly not for me." Her expression hardened. "Best for Caleb." "Do you really think I wanted to do this alone? That I wanted to keep him from you?" "I didn't, Logan. But I had to make a choice." His mind raced, replaying the past, searching for the moment when everything had changed. When she had made the decision that he wasn't meant to be a part of his own son's life. "Why?" he demanded. "Why didn't you tell me?" Sophie bit her lip, as if choosing her words carefully. "Because back then, you weren't ready," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "You lived for your work, Logan. Your company, your success, that was your whole world. And I was afraid that if I told you, you'd feel trapped. That you'd do the right thing out of obligation, but you'd end up resenting both of us." Logan's chest tightened. A part of him wanted to argue, to tell her that she was wrong, that he would have stepped up, that he would have been there. But another part of him, the part that knew himself too well, couldn't deny that she had a point. 3 years ago, he had been a different man. Would he have dropped everything? Would he have made room for a child in his perfectly structured life? He didn't know. And that uncertainty made him feel sick. "I should have had a choice," he said after a long silence. Sophie looked down for a moment, then back up at him. "I know," she admitted. "And I'm sorry." The sincerity in her voice made his anger waver, but it didn't erase the reality of what had happened. He had missed so much. Caleb's first words. His first steps. Every milestone, every laugh, every scraped knee. He hadn't been there for any of it. But he was here now. Logan exhaled, forcing himself to focus on what mattered. "Does he know about me?" he asked. Sophie hesitated, then shook her head. "No. He knows he has a father, but he doesn't know you." That hurt more than he expected. Logan ran a hand down his face, trying to collect himself. "I want to meet him properly," he said. "I want to know my son." Sophie studied him for a long moment, as if trying to determine if she could trust him. Then, finally, she nodded. "Okay." It wasn't much. It wasn't enough. But it was a start. Logan couldn't focus on anything else for the rest of the evening. Even after he left the restaurant, even as he sat in his car gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white, his mind kept replaying Sophie's words. "Yes, he's yours, 3 years. 3 years of a child's life that he had missed. His son's life." The weight of it pressed down on his chest, a mix of shock, anger, and something deeper, something more painful, regret. By the time he got home, his penthouse, which once felt like a sanctuary, now seemed empty in a way he had never noticed before. The sleek, modern furniture, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, the expensive art on the walls, it was everything he had worked for, everything he had thought he wanted. But now, for the first time, he realized there was nothing in this space that made it feel like a home. The next morning, Logan woke up with a single thought: he needed to see Caleb again. Not from across a restaurant, not in a rushed conversation with Sophie, but face to face, properly. He didn't know how to be a father, didn't know what he was supposed to say or do, but he knew one thing: he wasn't going to let more time slip away. Sophie had agreed to let him meet Caleb, but she had also made it clear that it had to be on her terms. So when she texted him that afternoon with an address, he didn't hesitate. He left work early, ignoring the curious looks from his employees, and drove across the city to a quiet park in one of the nicer suburban neighborhoods. When he arrived, he spotted them almost immediately. Sophie was sitting on a bench, watching Caleb as he played near a jungle gym. The boy was laughing, his small hands gripping the bars as he climbed, completely unaware of the storm of emotions swirling inside the man standing a few feet away. Logan had faced ruthless investors, closed impossible deals, and built an empire from nothing, but none of that compared to the nerves twisting in his stomach as he approached them. Sophie looked up as he neared, her expression unreadable. She gave him a small nod but didn't say anything right away. It was Caleb who noticed him next. The little boy turned, his dark eyes curious as he took in the unfamiliar man standing beside his mother. There was no fear, no immediate recognition, just the quiet, observant stare of a child who hadn't yet decided if he should be interested. Logan crouched down, leveling himself with Caleb's height. He didn't know the right words, didn't have a perfect script for this moment, so he did the only thing that felt natural. "Hey," he said, his voice softer than usual. "I'm Logan." Caleb studied him, tilting his head slightly. "Logan," he repeated, testing the name. Sophie cleared her throat gently. "Caleb, this is," she hesitated for just a second before continuing, "this is your dad." Logan held his breath, watching for Caleb's reaction. The little boy blinked up at him, processing the words. Then, instead of saying anything, he looked down at the toy car he was holding and slowly rolled it toward Logan's knee. It was such a simple, innocent gesture, but it nearly knocked the air out of Logan's lungs. He reached out, carefully picking up the car and rolling it back toward Caleb. The boy giggled, scooping it up again before sending it back to him. Logan swallowed past the lump in his throat. He had expected a lot of things, resistance, shyness, maybe even fear, but he hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected a 3-year-old to give him a chance before he even had the chance to ask for one. Sophie watched the exchange quietly, her expression softer than before. "You can play with him, you know," she murmured. "He won't bite." Logan let out a breath that might have been a laugh, then glanced at Caleb. "You like cars?" Caleb nodded enthusiastically. "Fast ones?" Logan smirked. "Yeah. I like fast cars too." For the next 30 minutes, Logan sat in the grass, letting Caleb show him his collection of tiny race cars, listening as the boy babbled about colors, speed, and which ones were the coolest. It was the most time he had ever spent with a child, and to his surprise, he didn't feel out of place. He didn't feel like a stranger in his own son's world. It was only when Caleb got distracted by another set of playground equipment that Sophie spoke again. "He likes you," she said, watching Caleb climb. "I wasn't sure how he'd react, but I think he likes you." Logan exhaled slowly. "I want to be in his life, Sophie." She nodded, but there was hesitation in her posture. "I need to know you're serious, Logan. This isn't just a business deal. You can't walk in one day and disappear the next. If you're in, you have to be in, for good." Logan met her gaze, understanding exactly what she was saying. "I'm in," he said without hesitation. "I don't know how to do this, but I'm going to figure it out. I won't disappear. Not again." Sophie studied him for a long moment, searching for something in his face. Then she nodded. "Okay," she murmured. "Then let's take it one step at a time." As Logan turned his gaze back to Caleb, who was now sliding down a small plastic slide with an excited squeal, he felt something shift inside him. For the first time in years, he had something that mattered more than work, more than success. And he wasn't going to let it go. The next few weeks were unlike anything Logan had ever experienced. He was used to structure, to carefully planned days filled with meetings, negotiations, and decisions that carried weight in the business world. But nothing in his high-powered career had prepared him for the unpredictability of a 3-year-old. Sophie had agreed to let him spend time with Caleb, but she was cautious, setting clear boundaries. At first, their meetings were short, afternoons at the park, quick lunches at a cafe, little moments where Logan was more of an observer than an active participant. He watched Caleb run ahead on playgrounds, watched how he got distracted by the smallest things, a bird hopping across the grass, the sound of an ice cream truck in the distance. The boy was curious about everything, and Logan quickly realized how much he had missed. One evening, he found himself standing in the toy aisle of a store, staring at an overwhelming display of action figures, race cars, and stuffed animals. He had no idea what a 3-year-old actually wanted. He picked up a fire truck, then put it back. Then a set of puzzles. Then a plush bear. He had negotiated billion-dollar contracts with more confidence than he had in that moment. "You need help?" an employee asked, clearly amused by his hesitation. Logan exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah. I have a son, 3 years old. I have no idea what I'm doing." The employee chuckled. "You can't go wrong with cars or dinosaurs." Logan nodded as if receiving critical business advice, then grabbed a set of small race cars and a stuffed dinosaur, hoping for the best. The next day, when he met Sophie and Caleb at the park, he knelt down and handed the bag to the boy. Caleb's eyes widened as he pulled out the dinosaur first, his small fingers tracing over its soft fabric. "For me?" Caleb asked, looking up at him. Logan swallowed the lump in his throat and nodded. "Yeah, buddy. For you." Caleb grinned and immediately hugged the dinosaur to his chest before turning back to the bag, pulling out the cars one by one and lining them up carefully on the grass. Sophie, standing nearby, watched the exchange with an unreadable expression. After a while, Caleb grabbed Logan's hand. Play. The single word hit Logan harder than he expected. It was so simple, yet it carried so much weight. Caleb wanted him there, wanted him to be part of his world. Logan sat on the grass, rolling the cars back and forth with his son, listening to Caleb make engine noises as he raced them against each other. He had never spent an afternoon like this before, never let himself slow down enough to just be in the moment. But here, with Caleb's laughter filling the air, nothing else seemed to matter. Later that evening, as they packed up to leave, Sophie walked alongside him as Caleb ran ahead, chasing after a butterfly. "You're good with him," she said after a moment. Logan glanced at her. "I have no idea what I'm doing." Sophie smiled faintly. "That just means you're a parent." Logan let out a soft laugh, but there was something more beneath it, relief, maybe even hope. He had spent his entire life believing that success came from having everything under control. But Caleb didn't care about control. He didn't care about Logan's business deals or the balance in his bank account. He just wanted someone to play with, someone to be there. And for the first time in his life, Logan realized that maybe, just maybe, this was the most important thing he had ever done. Logan had always believed that success came from consistency. If you wanted to build something that lasted, whether it was a company or a reputation, you had to show up every day, ready to put in the work. Now, he was learning that fatherhood was no different. He made time for Caleb every chance he got. It wasn't easy balancing his business empire with the needs of a 3-year-old, but he refused to let his work take priority over his son again. If that meant leaving the office early, rescheduling meetings, or handling calls after bedtime, so be it. Caleb came first now. Their routine began to take shape. Some days, Logan would pick him up from Sophie's apartment and take him to the park, where they raced cars on the picnic tables or fed ducks by the pond. Other days, they stayed in, building towers with blocks on Sophie's living room floor, only for Caleb to knock them down with gleeful laughter. Logan even took him to his office once, letting Caleb sit in his leather chair and scribble on sticky notes while pretending to take very important business calls. One evening, after spending the afternoon at the zoo, Logan brought Caleb back to Sophie's apartment. They had seen elephants, lions, and even fed some giraffes, but Caleb's favorite part had been the monkeys. He wouldn't stop chattering about how they swung from the branches, and as Logan carried him up the steps to Sophie's building, the little boy giggled into his shoulder, still excited. "You're a monkey too," Logan teased as Caleb clung to him, arms wrapped tightly around his neck. "I'm a big monkey," Caleb announced. Logan chuckled, shifting him in his arms. He knocked on Sophie's door, and when she opened it, she immediately raised an eyebrow at the sight of Caleb still clinging to him. "Looks like someone had fun," she said, crossing her arms. "He made me carry him for the last 3 blocks, Logan said, though there was no real complaint in his voice. Caleb looked up at his mother. "Daddy's strong." The words hit Logan harder than he expected. His grip tightened just slightly around Caleb, his breath catching in his throat. It was the first time Caleb had called him that, so casual, so natural, as if it had always been the truth. Sophie froze too. She met Logan's gaze, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Caleb, oblivious to the weight of his words, let out a big yawn and rested his head against Logan's shoulder. "I guess that's my cue to hand him over," Logan finally said, forcing himself to move, to focus. He carefully passed Caleb to Sophie, but the moment he did, Caleb reached out, grabbing onto Logan's shirt. "Stay," Caleb mumbled sleepily. Logan hesitated, glancing at Sophie for permission. She sighed, but there was no annoyance in it, just something softer, something more understanding. "All right," she said. "Come inside." Logan followed her in, watching as she carried Caleb to his small bedroom. The room was simple but cozy, stuffed animals lined the bed, and crayon drawings were taped to the walls. Sophie sat on the edge of the bed, gently pulling Caleb's shoes off while he blinked sleepily. Can Daddy read me a story? Caleb asked, rubbing his eyes. Logan wasn't sure if his heart could take much more of this. He swallowed and sat on the other side of the bed, looking to Sophie again. She hesitated but then handed him a book from the nightstand. Go ahead. Logan opened the book and began reading, his voice steady despite the emotions threatening to break through. Caleb curled up under his blanket, his small hand resting against Logan's arm as he listened. By the time Logan finished, Caleb's breathing had evened out. He had fallen asleep. Logan closed the book slowly, glancing at Sophie. She was watching him carefully, and in the quiet of the room, something shifted between them. You're good at this, she whispered. Logan let out a small breath, shaking his head. I don't know what I'm doing. You don't have to, she said. You're here. That's what matters. Logan looked down at his son, the son he hadn't known existed until a few weeks ago. He reached out, gently brushing a curl from Caleb's forehead, marveling at how easy, how right it felt. For the first time in his life, Logan realized that this, being here, being needed, meant more than any business deal ever could. And he wasn't going anywhere. Logan had never been the kind of man who second-guessed himself. Every decision he had ever made was calculated, precise, and executed with unwavering confidence. But fatherhood was different. There were no business strategies, no negotiation tactics that could prepare him for the uncertainty of raising a child. Every day with Caleb felt like he was stepping into uncharted territory, learning as he went, hoping that whatever he did was enough. In the weeks that followed, his bond with Caleb grew stronger. What had started as cautious introductions and short visits had turned into something more natural, something that no longer felt like he was intruding on a life that had existed without him. Caleb now greeted him with excitement, ran to him without hesitation, reached for his hand instinctively. One afternoon, Logan picked him up from Sophie's apartment for their first real father-son outing, just the two of them. Sophie had been hesitant at first, not because she didn't trust Logan, but because she knew how much Caleb relied on routine. Logan reassured her that he would take things slow, that he wouldn't overwhelm their son with too much at once. Where are we going? Caleb asked as Logan buckled him into his car seat. It's a surprise, Logan said, smirking as he started the car. Caleb's eyes lit up with excitement, and Logan realized how much he loved that look, pure, innocent joy, unburdened by worry or hesitation. It was a look he wanted to see every day. They arrived at the aquarium, a massive glass building filled with towering tanks of marine life. As soon as they stepped inside, Caleb's eyes widened in awe, his small hand tightening around Logan's fingers. Logan had taken countless business trips, stayed in the most luxurious hotels, seen wonders of the world, but nothing compared to the feeling of watching his son discover something for the first time. They wandered through the exhibits, stopping at each tank as Caleb pressed his hands against the glass, mesmerized by the fish swimming past. That one's big, Caleb said, pointing at a massive stingray gliding effortlessly through the water. Logan crouched down beside him. It's called a stingray. See how it moves? Looks like it's flying. Caleb nodded, his eyes never leaving the creature. Can I touch one? Logan grinned. Actually, yeah. They have a touch tank over there. Want to try? Caleb hesitated for only a second before nodding eagerly. Logan led him to the shallow tank where smaller stingrays swam lazily beneath the water's surface. A staff member explained how to gently touch them with just 2 fingers. Caleb reached out cautiously, his little hand hovering over the water. Logan placed his own hand on Caleb's back, a silent reassurance. The boy took a deep breath and finally touched one of the stingrays, giggling when it brushed against his fingertips. Daddy, it's slimy. Caleb exclaimed, looking up at him with pure delight. Logan felt his chest tighten at the word. It wasn't the first time Caleb had called him that, but it still caught him off guard every time. They spent the rest of the afternoon exploring. Caleb was endlessly curious, asking question after question, soaking in every detail. Logan answered as best as he could, realizing that for the first time in his life, he wasn't thinking about work, about emails, about deals waiting to be closed. He was just here, present, living in the moment with his son. When they finally left, Caleb was still bubbling with excitement, kicking his legs happily as Logan carried him toward the car. "Did you have fun?" Logan asked as he buckled Caleb in. Caleb nodded enthusiastically. "Best day ever." Logan felt something warm spread through his chest, something unfamiliar but deeply satisfying. "We'll do more days like this, okay?" Caleb grinned. "Promise?" Logan held out his pinky. "Promise." Caleb linked his tiny pinky with his father's, sealing the deal. That night, after dropping him off at Sophie's, Logan lingered for a moment longer than usual. Sophie noticed. "You okay?" she asked. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah. Today was good." Sophie smiled softly. "He loves being with you." Logan looked toward Caleb's bedroom door, where he could hear the faint sound of his son talking to his stuffed animals about stingrays. "I love being with him too," he admitted. Sophie studied him for a long moment before nodding. "You're doing better than you think, Logan." Logan wasn't sure if that was true, but for the first time, he was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, he was on the right path. Logan was beginning to understand that being a father wasn't just about showing up. It wasn't just about fun outings or gifts or making promises. It was about consistency, about being there in the moments that weren't exciting, about proving, day after day, that he wasn't going anywhere. The novelty of their time together had worn off slightly, but that was a good thing. It meant that Caleb was starting to expect him, that he no longer looked surprised when Logan showed up. Instead of cautious excitement, there was now something deeper, something steady, a trust that hadn't been there before. One evening, Sophie called him while he was finishing up at work. There was a slight edge to her voice, the kind of tension he recognized instantly. "Caleb isn't feeling well," she said. "It's nothing serious, just a cold, but he keeps asking for you." Logan didn't hesitate. He canceled his last meeting, grabbed his coat, and was in his car within minutes. By the time he arrived at Sophie's apartment, the sun had set, casting long shadows through the windows. When she opened the door, she looked exhausted, her hair pulled into a messy bun, dark circles under her eyes. "Rough day?" Logan asked, stepping inside. Sophie let out a soft laugh. "You could say that. He hasn't wanted to eat much, and he's been extra clingy. But the fact that he's asking for you, that's new." Logan's chest tightened at her words. He knew what they meant. Caleb saw him as part of his life now, as someone he could count on when he wasn't feeling his best. It was a responsibility that should have scared him, but instead, it made him more determined. "Where is he?" Logan asked. Sophie led him to Caleb's bedroom, where the little boy was curled up under a blanket, his stuffed dinosaur tucked under one arm. His cheeks were flushed, his small body still, but his big brown eyes lit up when he saw Logan standing in the doorway. "Daddy," Caleb mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. Logan moved toward him, crouching beside the bed. "Hey, buddy. How are you feeling?" Caleb sniffled, rubbing his nose against the blanket. "Tired." Logan glanced at Sophie, who gave him a knowing look before nodding toward the chair beside the bed. "You can stay if you want." Logan didn't even have to think about it. He sat down, leaning forward slightly, resting his arms on the edge of the bed. "Want me to stay with you until you fall asleep?" Caleb nodded slowly, his little hand reaching out toward Logan's. Without hesitation, Logan took it, feeling the warmth of his son's small fingers against his palm. For the next half hour, Logan sat there, listening to the soft sound of Caleb's breathing, watching his eyelids grow heavier until he finally drifted into sleep. He had never done this before, had never been needed in this way, and yet it felt completely natural. When he finally stood up, careful not to wake Caleb, Sophie was leaning against the doorframe, watching him. There was something in her expression, something softer than before. "You really care about him," she said quietly. Logan met her gaze without hesitation. "Of course I do." Sophie exhaled, crossing her arms. "I think part of me was waiting for you to get tired of this. For you to decide that being a father was too much work, that it didn't fit into your life." Logan frowned. "Sophie, I'm not going anywhere." She hesitated, then nodded. "I know. I see it now." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of her words settling between them. Finally, she sighed. "I'll sleep better knowing you're here. If he wakes up and needs you, I'll let you handle it." Logan felt something shift in that moment. It wasn't just about Caleb anymore. Sophie was trusting him too, allowing him into the life she had built with their son, allowing him to take on a role that should have been his from the start. As he settled onto the couch for the night, he realized that this was the first time in years that he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Logan woke up to the soft sound of small footsteps padding across the floor. He blinked, adjusting to the dim morning light filtering through Sophie's apartment. The couch beneath him wasn't exactly comfortable, but it didn't matter, he had barely slept anyway, too preoccupied with thoughts of the little boy sleeping in the next room. Before he could sit up, Caleb appeared in the doorway. His hair was messy from sleep, and he rubbed his eyes with one small fist, the other hand still clutching his stuffed dinosaur. He looked tired but better than the night before. "Daddy?" Caleb's voice was still thick with sleep, but there was no hesitation in the way he said the word. Logan felt something in his chest tighten. He hadn't realized how much he needed to hear it again. "Hey, buddy," he said, sitting up. "You feeling better?" Caleb nodded slowly, then climbed onto the couch without asking, settling into Logan's side as if he had done it 100 times before. Logan instinctively wrapped an arm around him, holding him close. Sophie appeared in the doorway a moment later, her eyes widening slightly at the sight of them together. Logan half expected her to say something, to remind Caleb to give him space, but she didn't. Instead, she just smiled softly and walked into the kitchen. "You hungry?" she asked. Caleb nodded against Logan's chest. "What do you want?" "Pancakes." Sophie smirked. "Pancakes it is." Logan stayed on the couch with Caleb as they listened to the quiet sounds of Sophie moving around the kitchen. Caleb's small body was warm against his trust in Logan so effortless it almost overwhelmed him. "Are you staying today?" Caleb asked after a while. Logan didn't even have to think about it. "Yeah, buddy. I'm staying." Caleb grinned, satisfied with the answer, and leaned further into him. Logan had spent his life chasing success, measuring his worth by the size of his empire, by the numbers in his bank account, by the power he held in the business world. But now, sitting here with his son curled up beside him, he realized none of that mattered as much as this. Later that morning, as they sat around the small kitchen table eating pancakes, Sophie looked at Logan with something different in her eyes. "Do you want to take him for the weekend?" she asked, almost casually. Logan froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. He glanced at Caleb, who was too busy drowning his pancakes in syrup to pay attention. "You mean, overnight?" Sophie nodded. "Yeah. If you're ready." Logan had been ready for a lot of things in his life. He had built companies from the ground up, faced impossible decisions, taken risks that most people wouldn't dare to. But this was something else entirely. He looked at Caleb, at the boy who had already changed everything, and knew there was only one answer. "I'd love that." Sophie smiled, and for the first time, it wasn't hesitant. It wasn't guarded. It was trust. And for the first time in his life, Logan Hastings knew exactly what he was fighting for. The ending of this story is both powerful and deeply satisfying because it doesn't rely on dramatic twists or forced resolutions, it thrives on quiet, meaningful moments of growth and connection. Logan's journey isn't just about discovering he has a son, it's about proving, day after day, that he is willing to show up, to learn, and to be the father Caleb deserves. What makes this conclusion so impactful is that it doesn't present fatherhood as something that can be fixed overnight. Logan doesn't instantly become the perfect dad, nor does Sophie immediately forget the years he was absent. Instead, trust is built gradually, through small, significant moments, Caleb reaching for Logan's hand, calling him "Daddy," without hesitation, Sophie offering him a full weekend with their son. These aren't grand gestures, but they are far more meaningful because they symbolize real change. The most beautiful part of this ending is the shift in Logan's priorities. At the beginning, he measured his worth through power, wealth, and control. But by the final chapter, none of that matters as much as the bond he is forming with his son. He is no longer just a businessman, he is a father, and for the first time, he truly understands what it means to fight for something that isn't about profit or success, but about love and belonging. This isn't just a happy ending, it's a realistic one. One where love isn't rushed, but earned. One where Logan's redemption isn't through apologies, but through action. And one where a little boy, who never even knew what he was missing, finally gets what every child deserves, a father who chooses to stay.